We'd like to welcome this enormous turnout for a wonderful occasion. And in keeping with a wonderful occasion, we have to thank a lot of people. This would not have happened if it weren't for all of the people I'm thanking right now. First and foremost, Robert, John, Norman, and Edward Hogikyan and their families, we thank for their generosity and participation throughout. Catherine Babayan in the Armenian Studies program, including Naira Tumanyan, Ingrid Peterson, and Kevork Bardakshyan. To Richard Gross, special thanks for heading up the University of Michigan custom millwork and cabinet shop's participation in this project, and the master craftsmen for their expert work. In library development, we thank Mari Vidic, Harriet Teller, Yvonne Greenhouse, Lynn Raleigh, and Mary Morris. Many thanks to all for your patience and continuing effort. In the library, Rebecca Dunkel, Elaine Westbrook, Brian Skibb, Nerea Yamas, Martha Conway, and Juki Sims. Paul Barrow and Marcy Bailey, Bill Fleming, Ruginart Strode, Benjamin Connors, Megan Hartline, Kelly Goodknecht, and Nancy Dam for their creative problem solving. Irina Muchnik, Walter Slater, Lee Billings, and Faiza Sayman for processing and cataloging the materials. And special thanks to Beth Snyder, who coordinated all of the above technical efforts, creating a smooth-running set of procedures that made this collection accessible but safe. And we greatly appreciate Shannon Zachary's consultations, some ongoing, with us on preservation concerns and practice. And if you want to see the work that she is continuing with, the right-hand side of the bookcase is going to be locked, unfortunately, but the materials there are going to be worked on, treated by her department. And last but not least, the library's Facilities Management Department. Many thanks to Phil Hahn, Will Lovick, John Crane, and many other people who actually helped out a little bit. Well, we have so many people that I did not remember. If I missed anybody, please know that we are very grateful to you. It was just a little bit of old age that crept in between me and your names. Tim Archer, we thank because he did the impossible, even frequently, without adequate planning time. And it was due to the work of Vahe Sahakyan that the collection was expertly and consistently represented in the catalog. And last but not least, sincerest thanks to Gerard Libaridian, who saw this project as a terrific opportunity long before I knew the name Hogikyan. He became our liaison, providing academic support, inspiration, and encouragement to set the project in motion and lead it through to completion. Thank you, Gerard. And now I'd like to introduce Norman Hogikyan, Associate Chair and Professor of the Department of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery, and Professor of Music. Is Norman here?
You know, I've spent a lot of time in U of M libraries, and somehow it doesn't seem right to be talking in the library. I'll be waiting for somebody to come along and tell me to shh, but I suppose if we're here with Janet, it's probably safe. On behalf of my brothers, Robert, Edward, and John, I'd like to thank you for being here. This is a very meaningful day for our family. the name of our parents, Azad and Margaret, are on this collection. And sometimes when names are on a collection or a building or a what have you, they're there in an honorary way, even though the individuals may not have had a personal role or a personal relationship with whatever that named entity is. And that's not the case with this, because these books didn't start out as a book collection. They began as my father's passions for his Armenian heritage, for history in general, and for Armenian history in particular. And whenever my parents traveled, they together sought out opportunities to acquire additional books on Armenian history and language and culture. They traveled to a lot of corners of the world where opportunities to acquire rare books existed. In some cases, books were gifted to them by friends or colleagues who knew of these interests, and those books often had almost poetic-sounding inscriptions in them. And I'll share some of those at the end of my remarks. And so there's a very deep and personal connection between my parents and this book collection. And we thought it would be more meaningful for all of you if I spoke a bit about Azad and Margaret this afternoon. But before I do that, since we're talking about the importance of names, I have to tell you something funny that happened in the course of making this gift to the university. Everything here at the U has a process, a protocol, some paperwork associated with it. And I know that because I've been on the faculty at the med school for over 20 years now. And so there was this very formal gift agreement that needed to be created. And we were passing this highly legal document back and forth between my brothers and me and Janet here at the library, who has been absolutely wonderful and professional throughout this entire process. And there were a few substantive edits that we wanted to see, and we were able to make those. But there was something else that was bugging the heck out of me about that document. But I thought, you know, it's really probably trivial. I'm sure it's just bothering me, so I wasn't going to say anything. And then at some point along the way, I'm pretty sure it was my brother John, said, you know, guys, I can't live with the fact that our names are in the wrong order on this document. And I thought, hallelujah, that was driving me crazy. You see, our names are always written in the same order: Robert, Edward, John, and Norman. That's the birth order. That's how it is. Of course, I'm always last, but that's how it was meant to be, and it wasn't that way on the original gift agreement. So once we realized it was bothering more than one of us, we were able to make that change. Now, it won't come as a surprise to our spouses, children, and perhaps some friends and colleagues to hear that we are each very much creatures of habit. But I'm sure the rest of you will just sleep better tonight, knowing that our names are in the correct order on the gift agreement. I'm going to talk a bit about my parents now. And I have to confess that for a middle-aged guy who's been a parent himself now for 23 years, to have the opportunity to reflect a bit about his parents, who have been gone for decades, is a little bit of an emotional endeavor. More than once, I got a little choked up thinking about what I would share with you today, and I'd estimate there's at least a moderate probability that'll happen this afternoon. I'm going to start by telling you an anecdotal story about each of them that I believe captures a bit of their character and personality, and then I will briefly tell you their life paths. The story about my dad is that his immigration to the United States was made possible in large part due to the assistance of several people on the West Coast, including Leon Peters, who was a successful Armenian businessman in the Central Valley in California. And he used his influence to help my father get a visa to come here from Turkey. And then he and others helped Dad get on his feet when he got to the U.S., and he never forgot that. And not long before Dad died of widely metastatic cancer, he was pretty sick at the time. He made a difficult trip across the country, chaperoned by my brother Robert, because he wanted to sit and personally say thank you again to them for giving him the opportunity to live in the United States. You see, no matter how successful or important he became here as a physician, he never forgot people who helped him out along the way, who gave him a leg up when he really needed it. And that reflected in how he treated others who were just getting started. The story about my mom is a completely different flavor, but I think also captures a bit of her personality. When I was maybe 8 years old or so, I can't remember the exact age, we had had some little social gathering at our home that warranted bringing out not only the good china, but the good heirloom English china that belonged to my great-grandmother or maybe my grandmother, I can't remember which. And a day or so after this little gathering, it was sitting all hand-washed on a tray up in our kitchen, waiting to be carried downstairs to where it lived, in a storage cabinet in little padded zippered cases. And I thought, well, let me help out. Let me carry this downstairs. And so I picked it up, started to walk down the stairs. Partway down, a cup starts to jiggle, and I'm trying to correct for that. And before I knew it, I dumped part of it on the ground, and it broke. And my mom was upstairs, and she heard that, and she came downstairs. And let's face it, she had a lot of opportunities for what to say as parent A in that situation. And what she said was, "Thank you, Norman, for trying to help me put that away." You see, she always looked for the good intentions in people, and she could usually find them. And she had a very, very kind heart. Now I'm going to tell you their life paths. My father was born in Istanbul in 1919. He was raised and educated there. Part of his youth and his education were at the Karagosian Orphanage School for Armenian boys. There at the same time was another teenager named Garo Papazian, and they were friends, but they lost track of each other after they left there. Well, Garo Papazian went on to be ordained Father Diron Papazian. And miraculously, they met up again years later in Detroit, Michigan, where Father Diron was the pastor of the Armenian church in Detroit. They were lifelong friends from that point. Father Diron baptized my brothers and me. He's been an important presence in our lives, and he's here with us today, right here in the front row.
They are there for books, and books are your best friends. And I never thought about this will happen to me. And last minute I heard about that, and I said that no matter what's going on in this city, my place will be in Michigan University, library in the Michigan University. And that's why I am here, and I am very happy for being here, because I look forward to see some surprises. The first surprise is here. You are the part of the first surprise. But I look forward to see some others, because it's full of mysterious things that are happening. And I am sure that God's help has something to do in it. Thank you very much. Best memories.
Shachun Argalam, Derhar. Dad went on to graduate from the University of Istanbul Medical School, and recognizing that his lot as a member of the Armenian Christian minority in Turkey was not to be a good one, he managed to immigrate to the U.S., as I just told you. He spent some time on either coast, ultimately came to Michigan because a postgraduate training position, a job, was available to him at the tuberculosis hospital in Detroit, Herman Kiefer Hospital. And he would, of course, settle here. He practiced pulmonary and internal medicine here for almost 3 decades until he passed away at the young age of 60 back in 1979. Dad was known as a very dedicated and much-loved physician. He was also dedicated to his Armenian heritage. He was active in Armenian affairs here in the U.S. He co-chaired the Midwest Armenian Assembly with Mr. Paul Kluhanjian, who's here today. He chaired the committee that made a youth camp a reality for Armenian children here. And he was active in all manner of affairs through our home church, the St. John's Armenian Church of Greater Detroit. And he collected Armenian books. And it would not be unusual that after my parents returned from a trip abroad, that a couple of weeks later, boxes of books would arrive at the house. They didn't just buy a book and stick it in their carry-on. Typically, boxes of books arrived. And it was usually a very joyous event for Dad when he would go through these books in his study and looking at what he had purchased. Now and again, he was a bit disappointed that some unscrupulous fellow in some corner of the world decided not to send what he had in fact paid for. But it was usually a very joyous thing. And he had intended to write on Armenian history in his retirement. I'll circle back to the books at the conclusion of my remarks. My mother was born Margaret Nichol in a small town in Northern Ireland in 1929. The name of the town is Bushmills. Those of you that enjoy Irish whiskey will recognize that, because Bushmills is known for the distillery that sits on the edge of town, originally licensed to distill in 1600-something. I can't remember what, but that's proudly displayed. Licensed to distill. I'm sure they were distilling a bit before that, but originally licensed to distill in the 1600s. And Mom grew up going to school and working in the family business, which was the Nichols Hotel in bustling downtown Bushmills. And she helped out with housekeeping and cooking duties and even barmaid duties. And she used to talk rather fondly of the good-looking American officers that stayed at the Nichols Hotel when they were training for D-Day on the nearby Irish coast that resembled what they would encounter in Normandy. And remarkably, for a happy-go-lucky girl of that era, from a small town in Ireland known for its whiskey, she went on to graduate from the prestigious Queen's University Medical School in Belfast. And furthermore, she graduated from medical school together with her sister Betty. And Betty would go on to receive a medal from Queen Elizabeth for her service to the United Kingdom. And after finishing her houseman year, the equivalent of what we call internship, Mom and a girlfriend decided to see the U.S. And so they lined up rotations at hospitals, starting on the East Coast and working their way west. And their second or third stop was, you guessed it, Herman Kiefer Hospital in Detroit, Michigan. And she met my dad. And in the course of, I think, just 3 months, romance blossomed. And although she briefly returned to Ireland, she came back as promised and married my dad in 1955 in Detroit. And they, of course, settled here. She would continue to work downtown for several years, stepped out of medicine for a period of time to focus on raising her family, and ultimately returned to medicine as an administrative physician with the state of Michigan, where she worked until she too passed away at the young age of 60, back when I was a general surgery intern. And simply put, I would say Mom was known for her sense of humor and her kindness. When I reflect a bit on growing up in our household, I see several themes. First and foremost was the importance of family and family time. Also, there was the importance of education, the importance of hard work, and the importance of cultural identity and heritage. And ours was a home in which both of our cultural identities were evident. On the same hearth or mantle, you'd find a samovar from Istanbul and a shillelagh from Ireland. A framed Irish blessing, may the road rise to meet you, and an ornate Turkish water pipe. The water pipe never failed to get the attention of any pothead friends who visited in high school. And we had to tell them that it was for decorative purposes only. We were raised in the St. John's Armenian Church community of Greater Detroit. It was very important to my mother that she embraced the Armenian community for my father. She, in fact, became quite an Armenian cook, which is also remarkable for a woman from Ireland. And I'm going to circle back to the books now. I find it fitting that the themes of family and education and cultural identity and a bit of hard work, right, Janet, are wrapped up in making this gift to University of Michigan. The books had been in boxes since our parents passed away, but we knew that they would want them to be a living library, books that were used by scholars to promote knowledge. We have an affinity for the University of Michigan. Between my brothers and I, we have 7 Michigan degrees. 3 of us are full-time or adjunct faculty. 4 of our children are current or future students. And I'm wearing a maize and blue tie. And so when we were seeking a permanent home for these books, it was natural for us to approach the robust Armenian Studies program and the extensive library system here at Michigan. The first person we spoke with from Armenian Studies was Kevork Bardakshin, and he came to my home one afternoon, and we had a cup of tea in my study, and we went through a box or 2 of books. And he validated what we thought to be the case but didn't know to be the case, that there were, in fact, significant books there. At one point, as I think only a historian can do, Kevork leaned back in his chair. He was holding a book that was over 300 years old, and he said to me, "Norman, just think of the hands this book has passed through and the eyes that have gazed on its pages." He introduced us to Vahe Hogikyan, who was, where are you, Vahe? Who was a visiting scholar from Armenia at that time. And Vahe, poor Vahe, spent countless hours at my dining room table going through the books one by one and creating a meticulous catalog. And subsequently, it has been Gerard Libaridian from Armenian Studies and Janet Crayne from the library, the Harlan Hatcher Library, who have been really the shepherds of this project. Which brings us to today. We couldn't be happier with this outcome. You heard me thank a few people along the way. I'll reiterate, I think, special thanks to Vahe, Gerard, and Janet. I'd also like to add my thanks to Phil Hahn in facilities here at the library, and to the talented craftsmen that built that beautiful cabinet and put our parents' names on it. And I'm going to close by reading you portions, some of the inscriptions that were in books that were gifted to my parents. These were from Dr. Zaven Dolabdjian, who was a prominent cardiologist in Yerevan, who became a good friend of my parents. Dear Azad, a piece from the glorious pages of our ancient history. Read and imagine your distant native lands. With affection, Zaven. Dear Azad, a little bit of native breath, a palm of frankincense smelling for your heart, a palm of soil from the homeland. To Margaret with her beautiful smile, and to honest Azad. To dear Azad, let the master's lyre sound in your soul. And lastly, to my compatriot, to my friend, to dear Dr. Azad Hogikyan, with best wishes for great successes in our humanistic profession and real happiness in our personal lives. Thank you all for being here.
I'm sure you know who I'm going to introduce at this point. Oh, can you hear me? Is that okay? Our next speaker is Gerard Libaridian. Alex Manoogian Chair in Modern Armenian History from 2001 to 2012, and former director of the Armenian Studies program, and a good friend. And he's going to be giving a talk on a world in a collection of books.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you all for coming here for this special occasion. It is a pleasure to be here, to see old friends, colleagues, and probably to make new ones. It is also an honor to be invited to say a few words at an event that for some may not be so significant, but for us, book and research lovers associated with universities, this is a significant occasion. It is for me anyway. I think by now you have the story of the collection. The family that did the collection, the story on how it reached us here at the University of Michigan. I hope you will allow me to use the first person plural, even though I'm not here anymore. After all, my position here was not only the last one I will ever hold, but also the longest one I've ever held. I was either a troublemaker, or I don't know why, but somehow it worked out, things worked out here. The Hogikyans, especially Dr. Norman Hogikyan, had contacted the ASP, and he told the story. I'm beginning with our colleague Kevork Bardakyan. I should add that the ASP executive was always and unconditionally supportive of the idea of finding a home for this collection at the Hatchell Library. In this, we had the invaluable support and assistance of Janet Crayne and Brian Skip and others that Janet mentioned, a long list, some of whom I never got to meet. We should also recognize Norman's leadership in working things out with a large and caring family. It's not always easy, and it was good to hear the story of the order of names. That's always a problem. There's the alphabetical order, there's the age order, and whatever. Now, permit me to say a few words about the collection. Having gone through these titles, excuse me, a few times, beginning in, I think, 2008, I believe, I ended up with an overwhelming sense that what we have here is more than a collection of some 500 plus volumes, each of which has its own value. This is a collection created by a man of vision. It really surprises me that Norman says they were kind of eclectically collected. This is really a collection. It is a monument to Armenian civilization. It is a very well thought out collection of the essential works of his time and more. Azad Hogikyan has created a universe through these volumes. The significance is not just in the value of each item, but in the coming together of these essential volumes that at the end amount to much more than the sum of its parts. In this collection, Hogikyan has recreated a world that was lost in 1915, but continued breathing in each page of each volume with each of Azad Hogikyan's heartbeats. As I imagine him leafing through these careful choices and some that he received as gifts, we have here the category of history. We begin with our famous chroniclers, and of course with Moses Khorenatsi. Now, who's known as the father of Armenian history, but many people don't know he was a master political analyst. He should have done very, very well on CNN. Not Fox, but CNN. His volume of Armenian, he creates this Armenian history of an Armenian people in the 5th century. Some will argue not, but let's take the word of the majority of scholars, that it's 5th century. Some people think his 7th, 9th, 11th, but the argument goes on, and I can tell you the last debate between Robert Thompson, a major scholar who translated Khorenatsi, and Levanto Ramesha, who was the first president of Armenia, but he's still a major scholar of the old world. And at the end, when neither can convince the other, Bedrosian insisting the guy is 5th century, Thompson saying, no, 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 he's 9th at the earliest. And Bedrosian says, listen, Robert, what would you English people have given to have had a Khorenatsi in the 9th century? But Khorenatsi, as I said, is a political analyst. I experimented once. I was reading sad news, or what was sad for me, from Armenia, sitting here in our house in Ann Arbor. And it occurred to me that there's an analysis I've read someplace that explains what's in Armenia, what's happening in Armenia. And I took out Khorenatsi. He's got, at the end, a lamentation, which you really have to read. What I did was change 3 words in the 3-page lamentation that Khorenatsi said as to why we lost the kingdom of Arshagunis. He has an explanation. All I did was I changed 3 words and called my daughter and read those 3 pages. And she said, what a genius analyst. Who's he? Can I meet that guy? He's got a perfect description of what is happening in Armenia. That's Khorenatsi. But he's got Yerishe, he's got Gorin, he's got Kantagetsi from a later period, and many other chroniclers. More contemporary historians, he got Hagop Manantian, Leo, Levon Hogikyan, Magakia Ormanian, Arshak Alboyadjian, Hagop Anasyan, Zadurian, and many of the main ones of the mid-century, mid-20th century. The guy had books that proved that he was non-partisan, that he really cared about the history and the politics and the culture of Armenians. He had Simon Varatsian, the Tashnak. He had the Hinchak Sabah Gülyan volumes. He has the Ramgavar 40th anniversary volume. He has geography, Ananya Shiragatsi. He has language and the major dictionaries, Harachi Ajarian, Stepan Malkhasyan, and many others. In literature, he has Barur Sevak to the Grimm brothers. There's an unknown Shamlian somewhere, probably an example of self-published writers and authors who would give free copies to people they respected, and they thought their books should be there, even if the guy doesn't read it. So there's the Shamlian. I don't know who Shamlian is. But it gets to William Saroyan, the Armenian-American writer. Arpiarian, 19th century Armenian author. Zahrad, more contemporary, extremely talented Armenian poet in Istanbul. In culture, arts and architecture, Toramanyan, Der Nersesyan, books on the miniatures, fundamentals references such as the Soviet Armenian Encyclopedia, which remains, despite its ideological biases, an important source for information. Theotic yearbooks, these were begun in Istanbul, and they were sources of education for many, many people in everything. These were almanacs that were published for a number of years. A couple of volumes that bring approving smiles, Illustrations of History of Armenian Medicine, 1958, A Gift from Yerevan, Norman mentioned Zaven, Dr. Zaven Dolabjian, with the inscription, if I may add to Norman's excellent selection, to remember always that we have had culture of science for thousands of years. The articulation by the particular category of Armenians who had taken the almost unbearable but otherwise self-assigned burden of making sure Armenian culture is known and continues. 1931, Istanbul published book, The Book of the Kitchen. Serious stuff. That is all the basics. This is where I think all graduate Armenian studies students should begin. They should go through this library first and then go on to other stuff. It is remarkable that any person who was not professionally involved in Armenian studies could create this universe, and in such a multidisciplinary and non-partisan manner. Now, for me, there are three books that stand out. Unusual. 1781 Venice books called Mathematics. Can you imagine? This is published by the Mkhitaryists, and our colleague Kevork has always indicated the importance of the Mkhitarist fathers, the Catholic fathers in Venice. They published phenomenal books. In 1781, they thought it important to have an Armenian book on mathematics. Now, you can imagine that most probably a lot of the places where Armenian education was taking place, this would be the textbook on mathematics. A second very unusual book is a very little-known amateur historian, Levanto Ramesha. He was a craftsman in Paris, and he wrote books. One of the most important books he wrote was on the Armenian political parties. He was not trained, but his insights have not been transcended. What he says about Armenian political parties could today apply to what we have, the anthropology, so to speak. But he has sociological, psychological insights. A man who was just a simple craftsman, had been active in Armenian politics, and he wrote these books, published them in Beirut late. He also has a book on the Armenian church and on the diaspora, but I think his monumental work in terms of insights is, and how do, I haven't seen many libraries that have Chormisyan. And Azad Hogikyan had Chormisyan. Couldn't be by chance. But the winner is Book of the Poetry of Frigg. Late 13th century, early 14th century Armenian poet. Well, we've had poets at all times. Most Armenians consider themselves poets. And some of them even publish their poems. Frigg is distinguished by what he wrote. He had very radical views of clergy and the church, of class differences, critical of inequality and injustice in the world. This is late 13th century, early 14th century. He was a devout man, but he thought there was too much hypocrisy. And there was a question regarding God when there was so much injustice and inequality in the world. Even before Norman sent a short bio, I imagined the person who brought together these volumes to bring life to a defeated people through culture and civilization. I imagined him as a diligent, disciplined, caring, and gentle, systematic and careful person, careful in his relations, delicate in his judgments, and strong in his convictions. Before I even knew who Azad Hogikyan was, I felt the presence of an open mind and probably a noble one. Then came Norman's brief bio. I got to know a little more, not only about Azad, but also about Margaret Nichol from Northern Ireland. Somehow I was not surprised of the affinities. I should mention in parentheses, I am an honorary Irishman in North Cambridge, Massachusetts, the same neighborhood as Tip O'Neill, and same drinking culture. So, in fact, the mayors of Cambridge are all Irish, of course, and Kevork may remember in the 80s, the mayor of Yerevan was in Cambridge. He was at Harvard at the time, and the mayor of Cambridge, the mayor of Yerevan was having discussions with the mayor of Cambridge on becoming sister cities. Kevork was doing the translation and introductions, but I think at some point he had other things to do. He asked me to replace him. So we're sitting in the hotel room of the mayor of Yerevan, Hogikyan, and we're talking, and he says, Jirar, I don't know. Yerevan is a capital of a republic. Cambridge is a small town. What do you have, 150,000 people? We've got more than 1 million people. Why should we become sister cities? I said, Mayor, do you know Khorenatsi? And he said, yes. I said, do you know how he starts his work? He starts his work by saying, although we are a small nation, but we have achieved major successes and events that are worth recording. And this is Cambridge. You've got Harvard, you've got MIT, you've got all kinds of things. And now I said, if you benefit 10% from this, Yerevan will be a different place. And you can't go against Khorenatsi and be a good Armenian, not even a good communist, right? So the deal was signed the next day. Now, there is a certain affinity between the Irish and the Armenians. There's an instinctive understanding of histories and troubles. Many do not know that the first 1892 program of the Tashnaktutyun, the Socialist Armenian Revolutionary Party established 1890, the program begins with noting a confluence of ethnicity and class in world history. And to illustrate their thesis, in the second paragraph of the first ever written program of that party, the authors bring the example of English lords and Irish farmers, saying, we need a revolution because you can't do these things peacefully. Can you imagine English lords giving up their privileges peacefully to create equality with the Irish workers? So this goes back. There's an affinity there. I may be mistaken, but it seems to me that Margaret Nichol was an integral part of Azad's quest for that recreation of civilization and of culture for survival, and Norman's comments indicate that, of the vindication, at least through history, and respect for one's civilization, of one's dignity and humanity. At the least, it is difficult to imagine that Azad's world could have been so enriched with this process without the full support and understanding of the Irish Margaret. Thank you. Thank you, Kevork. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Brian, Skib, and all the others, the Hogikyans and the Librarians, the ASP executive committees over the last many years for the continuing support for this project. I was told that this may be the last collection of a hard copy to be accepted by the library. This is a credit to the community. It could not have happened to a better collector, to a better family, to a better program, to a better library, and to a better university. Thank you.